As the weather slowly cools and the northern wind starts setting in, the twilight of the year rests on the horizon. And here in Texas, we have a tradition given to us from the Shakers of the southeast, to sit and reflect on the past during the cool hours of the day, right before the sun sets below the hills. 'Tis a gift to be simple, and I thought it would be fun to share some regional ghost tales and mythologies from my favorite countrysides. Because of this, as we approach Thanksgiving, I'm going to be doing a couple bite-sized retellings of myths from my home country that I was told growing up, and I would love to keep alive. From Old Scratch's 9 Questions, to the Seguin Donkey Lady, El Muerto, to more Western myths like Cocopelli and the Giant Men of New Mexico. Every culture has mythology, so it makes sense that we would too at the Crash of Worlds. So scoot up closer to the fire, strangers. The percolator's making some coffee and the boudin's sizzling. Tonight we'll be talking about Old Scratch, the Dark Woodsman, or the Devil, a wandering, dealing spirit who delights in the misfortune of those he deals with. The origin of the myth is not known. As some say, the dark figure walked the Americas long before the settlers from the east arrived, and some say he came in with the slave traders, climbing from hell on the tails of the sailors' coats. But regardless, he was everywhere by the time he started showing up in literature about the 1830s. He's often described as a tall, well-dressed, and wealthy-looking man, often covered in soot and cinders. He isn't the Christian devil, instead taking a far more business-like approach to his trickery, letting his victims do the damage themselves. As such, he remains a very neutral figure, similar to Eshu El-Agbara, who will lift you with one hand and crush you with the other, representing the natural consequences of one's actions, and the embodiment of being careful what you wish for. It is possible to make a deal with the Old Scratch and come out significantly better off, if you're skilled and intelligent. However, the consequences you face if you aren't careful are often very dire. The story of the Mississippi Crossroads is well known, as blues singer Robert Johnston made a deal with the devil to learn guitar, at the price that a soul would be owned by the devil after he died. However, he failed to account he would mysteriously pass away soon after at the age of 27. In fact, Old Scratch's tight connection to music, even appearing in more modern songs like The Ghost Riders in the Sky and The Devil Went Down to Georgia, to name a couple. But you might be asking, why is he called Old Scratch? Why not just the Devil, or other regional names that are pretty self-explanatory? Well, that's actually up to debate, and there are 2 answers to that question. One, well, it could be in reference to the word scrat, which is a Middle English for goblin or demon. It's fairly straightforward and digestible, but I have an alternate answer, one that was told to me when I was young, much like I tell you now. You see, back before the power lines cut the plains, and back before the West was tamed, there was a traveling cobbler who rode his covered wagon, making yearly shoes for all the families on the frontier. He was so skilled, no one would settle for anyone else. He prided himself on his work, and how every shoe he made fit perfectly, and was so durable, oftentimes they could be worn for many years on end. His only fear was that he was getting very old, and he had never trained an apprentice, so when he died, his craft would be lost forever. But no matter where he looked, or who he asked, no one was able to work underneath him, as the travel made them homesick and the work was meticulous and hard on the body. One day, however, over the horizon rode a handsome businessman on a jet black horse. With a swift and smooth movement, he dismounted and leaned on the worn canvas of the cobbler's wagon. "You're getting old, cobbler," said the man, "and I fear when you die, the whole country will go barefoot." The cobbler was shy from the flattery, but looked up from his work. "That is true. If only I could live forever, that I might keep servicing for the rest of time." The man smiled and introduced himself as the devil, and said, "Cobbler, you can live forever. I'll see to it. However, in return, you must make me a shoe that fits my foot perfectly, so that my feet are never sore." The cobbler was taken aback, as he knew making deals with the devil was wrong. But shoes were the cobbler's specialty, and there was a small price to pay for immortality. Just think what good the cobbler could do with all that time. So reluctantly, the cobbler agreed, and the devil grinned, allowing the cobbler to take measurements of his foot. However, the cobbler soon realized that something was very wrong, as the devil's foot would never stay the same size, sometimes so small it could fit under the petal of a flower, sometimes so large that his wagon would groan and strain from the weight. The cobbler was frightened, and he looked up at the devil. "I can't make a shoe for this. You've set me up," the devil laughed. "I understand this is a very difficult task, so I'll give you 3 chances to make it right. But if you fail the 3rd time, I'll take your everlasting soul as my payment." And with that, the devil departed, and the cobbler set to work making a giant shoe, big enough to hold the devil's feet even if they were the size of his wagon. But as he worked, his hands grew more and more tired and were withered and useless by the time he was finished. But he had made the most beautiful shoes of that size ever seen, and the devil rode back down the hill to try them on. He slipped into the shoe easily, but as he went to walk, his foot was too small and slipped out just as quick as they'd slipped in. The devil laughed. "It fits for a time, but not forever. I can't trade infinite life for a temporary shoe, cobbler. You have 2 more chances." And with that, the devil departed for the second time. The cobbler, dejected, set off to work, making the smallest shoes ever made. With a great lens to see the miniature threads, it was dainty and ornate, just about the size to suit a fly. However, easy as the work was on his hands, by the time he had finished the shoes, his eyes had clouded and become worthless, and the devil rode down the hill again. He squeezed one shoe onto his foot, but it soon burst at the seams as it was too small, and the devil frowned. "Your shoe's too small, cobbler. You have 1 more chance. I'll return in the morning, and will leave either with a perfect pair of shoes or your soul." The cobbler sat and cried until the sun set, and cried more until the sun rose again, as he was now lame and blind, couldn't craft even a normal shoe, let alone a shoe suitable for the devil. And just as he said, right as the sun rose above the hills, the devil rode back down to the cobbler, still sitting where he'd left him. "I'm here to collect your soul, as you've made no shoes for me," the devil said, reaching his hand downwards toward the cobbler. But just then, the cobbler had an idea. "Blind and deaf I may be," the cobbler began, "but it's you who can't see. I have a shoe for you, devil." He was confused, as the cobbler held up the other tiny shoe from the day before. The devil frowned. "That is true, cobbler, I don't see. How you could provide the same shoe as yesterday and deem it sufficient still." The cobbler insisted that the devil wear the shoe, and he reluctantly agreed. However, right as the devil shrunk down to try it on, the cobbler scooped him right up in his own shoe and fastened it tight on his foot, trapping the devil within. Having been fooled, the devil couldn't take the cobbler's soul, nor his life, and demanded to be released. But the cobbler refused, deciding instead to travel from town to town and teach people his many different cobbling techniques, and warn them against dealing with the devil, stripping the demon of all his power. Finally, desperate to escape, no matter the cost, the devil took on the form of an itch, rested on the cobbler's arch, that itched day in and day out, never relenting, always worsening. It was true that the old cobbler couldn't die, but now, with the itch, he couldn't ever rest either, always trying to scratch his foot through the sole of his shoes. But they were so well made, so durable, this was impossible. It's unknown how long the 2 of them fought, but it's known that eventually the cobbler relented and took off his shoe, relieving the itch and dying in an instant. But because he was fooled, and because he lost so much dignity as to be trapped in such a way, the devil of the Americas was referred to as Old Scratch by all who heard the tale, and no longer has power to wander hither and thither, only appearing to those who seek him out first. But that's enough ghost stories for one night. Come back again some other time. The fire is dim enough for me to get some sleep. And remember, Old Scratch is listening, so don't let him know how to strike a deal. Until next time, strangers.